episode 87, and we have a very special guest for our face to face interview today. It's Sudarshan Sarma. He's the ex CEO of Cars on Rent. He's had leadership positions in Flipkart, Google, and had started his career with GM. So let's get right down to it.
I was asked by my sister's teacher when I was very young, I think class one, what do you want to be when you grow up? And the first thing I had said was that I want to be an automobile engineer. Then I came close, yeah, got into the mechanical field, but then I went into my MBA and then the line changed. You, on the other hand, as somebody who's been in the auto space, and of course, you have a lot of flair with AI as well. What are your thoughts on where the auto industry is going, as well as how do you feel that AI is going to revolutionize the auto industry?
Interesting question. I didn't get into science. I was a commerce student, though I did have the dream of working with auto companies. When I was working with Google from, let's say, 2011 to 2016, we would often have conversations internally about various different verticals and industries. And many of my peers and I actually used to lead some of those verticals. And the joke we always had was the auto industry just doesn't seem to move. It's been the same for the last 100 odd years. What's very interesting with the auto industry, particularly, is the fact that it has now suddenly become one of those most innovative industries with electrification, autonomous driving, so on and so on. I think AI definitely adds a whole new layer to things, right? So let's break up the AI piece into three things. One is, how can AI help me as a person who is driving and utilizing the car on a regular basis? How can AI help me with maintenance or certain features that I might want in my car? I'll get into that. That's very interesting. And last but not least, how can it help from a production slash logistics perspective for the OEMs? Right. So let's look at the first bit. One of the very interesting things with data is that cars now can keep sending and receiving data not only between one car to the other, but also from the OEM or the manufacturer to your own car. That's there right now from one of the lowest, cheapest Hyundai's all the way up to a Rolls Royce. But interestingly, can I put this to utility with regards to helping me optimize my ownership experience? For example, if I am a safe driver, if I'm easy on the throttle, if I'm easy on the brake, if I'm not constantly speeding beyond the speed limit, cars now even know through cameras what the speed limit is. Even in India, you get a lot of those cars. Right? Interestingly, can I actually then tweak my insurance premium as a safe driver versus an unsafe at a very basic level? I know there is some work happening in certain countries towards this, but if you actually look at the way we still pay insurance premiums in India, it is more or less a percentage of the previous year. And what is your no claim bonus? If you claim something, you get penalized. You don't claim something, they're like, oh, you know what, we'll give you 20% off. So, from an ownership experience, it really sweetens that. The second thing is, are there certain features that I need to give, let's say, people in the north, which I don't need in the south or the west of the country? For example, but BMW was under a lot of flack recently for giving heated seats as a subscription. Interesting concept. It go down very well with customers because if I'm paying the money, I need to get the feature. Whether I use it or not is a different thing. But if the hardware is present, can I actually make sure I tweak certain things to ensure that I get that usage delight whenever I take the car out? The third piece, which I mentioned, was what can the OEMs really do? Again, with everything to do with data, if I am getting feedback through the system that a particular feature that we've invested through a lot of R&D is not being used, I possibly don't need to get engineered into the subsequent model year. Can I then replace it with something else which will actually be of utility to the user, to the driver? And it's amazing how the user and driver are now, we can use that. It's all software and hardware at the end. The other interesting bit, if you ask me, is when it comes to designing the future product. Can I take basic feedback in terms of how the touchscreen is being used, how certain features are being used, and then improve on things which are hard to access? I'll give you a simple example. There are various cars now in India. I'm not taking any names. There are friends from various OEMs. It's a three-step process to turn the fan from number two to number three because it's all touch screen based. In fact, interestingly, in Europe, they've said that if you want to basically focus on safety, you need to start going back to physical buttons, right? Because a screen is harder to use than physical. So, can I actually take some of this intelligence coming in from the way people are using their vehicles and build that into my future variants, future models? Last but not least, obviously, study driving habits. My favorite example is the Mercedes EQS. If you have to cross one of those speed breakers in Bombay, you have a lift system. that you activate and the car goes up, cross the speed breaker. Do it once and set it. And the next time you come to that same place, the car raises itself. When we think of it, very simple. Why hasn't anyone done this sooner? So building a lot of features like this, which are of immense utility, is very important. That's where I see the whole AI game playing.
The EV sector in the US, it's slowing down again. In India, apparently, it's a huge concern around the resale market and the infrastructure is not ready and so on. On the other hand, in the US, with so many different players entering this new sales space, I think they are having their own. All the big brands are downsizing. Do you really feel EV is the next future in the auto space, or do you think it's going to be hybrid because there's a lot of focus on Japanese makers in that field as well?
Hats off to the Japanese brands, especially Toyota, which has been talking about hybrids from day one, saying we will reluctantly go BEV, battery electric vehicle, but we will also have a complete option of hybrids in our portfolio. Definitely, electrification is the future. Now, how we go about it is very important. Are we going to really solve the problem that electrification set out to solve? Number one being reduction in pollution. Have we solved for it? I don't think so to some extent because we're both in Bangalore. There is a power cut at least once in 3 4 days. Then you can hear the entire generators are coming on, and my car invariably sometimes is charging down, which means I'm burning diesel to charge an EV. If you're in Bombay, you're slightly better off because there's no power cuts. I believe there was one yesterday, but normally there isn't. And a lot of that electricity comes from hydro. Secondly, how are we disposing batteries? The government is coming down heavily on brands saying, please have a full end-to-end solution in terms of the life cycle of the battery. Give it a second life, give it a third life if possible, and then dispose of responsibly. Producing the first mass produced car before perfected everything was a hugely polluting exercise. Now the ICE sector has had 100 years behind it in terms of getting everything absolutely right. Like most of these companies still follow a just-in-time process. When it comes to batteries, you'll be surprised to know that in various cases, even the largest EV makers, the battery is assembled in a different country and the car is made in a different country. So what you're effectively doing is you're polluting while you're mining the lithium and the cobalt. You're then moving all those minerals and metals somewhere. You're then moving the finished battery to a plant where the car is put together. New technologies in terms of batteries might reduce reliance on lithium, but we'll have to wait and see. But coming to your point on infrastructure, cars and bikes, for instance, two wheelers at some point, which charge in 10, 12, 15 minutes because having a high voltage architecture, slightly far fetched when it comes to affordable sector. Tesla and let's say BYD, and we just spoke about Xiaomi launching a car in China, are not the answer for mass electrification in India. It is commercial vehicles, it is two wheelers, it is three wheelers, it is last mile. If we get even two out of these four sorted, private mobility sector, which is cars that you and I drive, can be the beneficiary of new technology because you and I probably are willing to spend a little more. We're not looking at an ROI when we use it on a day-to-day basis, like a person who's possibly in a last mile delivery for Zomato or Swiggy or Amazon. So I think it's important to understand that India needs India-centric problems.
You're a seasoned leader. You've been the CEO as well, so you've led whole organizations. What are the three most critical traits that you feel that a leader should have?
I think empathy, number one, is very, very critical. The reason that this comes number one for me is I was the CEO of a company bang on the first day of the lockdown during the COVID pandemic. Right? An important thing is you as a leader need to demonstrate empathy in every decision and every interaction you have. I understand what the problem is, and then have a solutions mindset. Very important. Not leaders nowadays come to the people with that. A solutions mindset of how that needs to be solved. I can have an empathetic conversation with an employee that I need to actually ask to part ways from the organization. But it is how I go about doing it that will be the difference between making that not so great experience to making it a horrible experience. The second piece is clarity of vision. It's very easy to get bogged down in terms of where the business is heading. Every business is seasonal. Things go up, things go down. You miss targets. When I was with Amazon Rent, we had to ask people to leave. A lot of dynamic things keep happening, whether you like it or not. You're not in control of everything. So I think clarity of where the business is going is important because the north star of the business needs to be the CEO, needs to be the C-suite to some order to the chaos. The third, customer focus becomes a very critical part. I believe that in a company that relies on revenues coming in obviously from customers, there is no such thing as a non-customer facing job. I've had a lot of B2B stints within B2C companies. Say last company was Flipkart, takes most of the revenue from selling products to you and me, right? It's ultimately a marketplace. But we manage agency and client relationships because we sold advertising on the platform and off the platform. You need to make sure that you're spending enough time to understand why they pick you over other platforms or why they pick other platforms over you. In my case, and my teams may have loved me or hated me for it, but you shouldn't be in the office as a salesperson. Have that customer focus. And this goes right across from, let's say, somebody who's a manager level right up to a C level. Spend time with customers to understand what makes them tick. That will make sure you get success in the business.
You've actually raised something very interesting and very close to my heart. We have this concept called 24-48 policy, right? People sitting in 24 degrees Celsius offices don't really have a view of what's happening outside at 48-degree on the ground, as you say. And this is something that needs to happen. But as a leader, what is your take? Why doesn't this really percolate down to the leaders?
That's a very interesting point. Structurally, companies seem to have changed and moved away from customer focus to a lot of internal focus. The lowest of employees are doing the field job. The people above them are making presentations and sheets to satisfy the guys above them. They're making presentations and sheets to satisfy the people above them. And they're going and showcasing this to the CEO, etc. The simplest solution is to go and ask the customer, why are you not spending more with me? But instead of that, you fall back on sheets and presentations to prove that you're doing your work. And I've been very against this. And this is exactly what happens when, number one, customer focus, as I mentioned earlier, and number two, you need to make sure that you are working on the right pillars to make the business grow. And that's something only your customer can tell you. And also, by the way, there is not too much by way of tactical solutions coming in from the leadership anymore. And failure, in my view, needs to be celebrated in an organization. We tried everything, did not succeed. What's the next plan? Nowadays, I think failure is just not tolerated. Surprised to see a lot of startups don't seem to tolerate it anymore. Meta, Facebook, when I was there, we had these posters which kept reinforcing the culture of the company. And there was one very interesting thing that said, "What would you do if you were not afraid?" And that it's got such deep meaning on so many levels. If you are not afraid, you would basically take a lot more risks to make sure that your business, your customer, everything succeeds, everyone's kept happy. Failing fast, learning from it, and moving on. Very important for a company to prosper. Without that, I think the culture is not really there.
So, on that note, what's your take when it comes to the usual perception? I need to be in the office for much longer and only then am I actually producing the work.
Let me fall back on what a leader at Google always told us. I don't care if you're working from a beach as long as you do your numbers. And at that time, we happened to be in Goa when he mentioned this. Hours and productivity have nothing to do with each other. It does if you're talking about the manufacturing industry where I'm working on an assembly line building a product. Definitely. But again, you drag that beyond a certain point, you will start having failures and issues with the product in terms of quality. When it comes to workforces, particularly pedigreed workforces, it is important too that you're spending the right amount of time to get that piece of work done and meet the client expectation. Now, if that means 40 hours a week, 50 hours a week, 60 hours a week, it's fine. But if this is happening week after week, month after month, year after year, there is a structural problem. Classic case is the sales team very often doing operational work while the operations team is doing something else. Right? So that needs to be streamlined. Again, leadership needs to take a step back and then say, hey, you know what, how to actually reassess and reorganize this to make sure that people are energized to bring out the best in themselves.
Multiple interesting things in this. What you're mentioning is the fail fast approach. That's one of my favorite things as well. I have actually seen this even happening in startups. People in sales are doing everything except sales. The people who are supposed to be responsible for the product are doing everything except the product. And this seems to be happening across the board. You've been in the confluence of a sales and marketing field for a very long time. So, what is your distinction when it comes to a sales that you have to get these kind of numbers month on month, quarter on quarter, versus a marketing team which is considered as a completely different silo? How close do you feel that the two really are?
It's easy to say this, but I think cross functional exposure between teams is very critical. which is why I remember very clearly that at Google, for instance, we had a hard target for the sales team, but we also had a soft numbers target for all the teams that supported us, which for me to do 100 crores as a salesperson, the product team had to also step up to aid me to do that 100 crores. So you need to align that common goal across all of them. So I think that common goal, common purpose, it can only be one. It can't be that your job is to do this plus this. You will automatically find that the jobs that are non-customer facing will start taking all that time because they're mostly internal tasks and things that we do.
IBM themselves have also confirmed that they are getting rid of 30% of their workforce, and they're all non-customer facing roles, which they're replacing with AI. Most of the marketeers, they're like, fine, let's just sit here, make it on the laptop, and we can push it across. And the sales team have a very different view because the marketeers don't really know what is. So you've been in the marketing field for like your in the right beginning, right from your Google days as well. So how do you feel that marketing itself has changed?
The word OG, I think we were the OG team because Google was the first to push this whole digital media and digitization. In fact, there's a video that I launched recently on very similar lines on LinkedIn. So, how has media changed? Very interesting question. Let's look at where it was. There was complete disgust in digital media because between 2007, 2008, 2009, you had a lot of the first wave of websites that came out. For example, let's say in the finance sector, where people would just take information from the user and say that, you know what, I'll get a loan, I'll make sure you get these test drives, or I'll make sure you get insurance policy at a lower premium. People took money from dealerships, for example, saying that we'll give you so many test drives, pay us. Dealers, of course, thought digital was the magic pill, paid the money, and then didn't see anything. So there was definitely some distrust when we burst onto the scene. Second thing that happened was the leadership of the customers we were dealing with to get on board with digital. And let's face it, they're also doing a job. And all these years, decades that many of them operated, especially in auto, we had CMOs who were in that company for 20 years, 30 years, etc., who said, listen, radio, print, a few ads on movies, movie theaters, etc., have worked very well so far. Why should I topple the apple cart when things are working? It was our job to hammer across the point that your customers are evolving. They are spending more and more time on things like video, on things like websites, apps, not so much those days. So give us a shot. So even a 5-10 lakh rupee campaign that came our way was a success because it was a test and learn. And the pressure was then on us to make sure it worked. At that point in time, it was more about, am I buying Google? Am I buying YouTube? Facebook, I 2011, 2012, very, very big in India. Am I buying certain news websites? I want to be on the top of the Economic Times stock market update saying call the dealer to take a test drive, which effectively was more placement based buying or property based buying. You can call it whatever you want. The second bit was then, can I map your journey across the internet? And can I give you relevant communication through the journey that you're doing? So, one video on YouTube, followed by one post on Facebook, then to a news app to basically read the news, and then to maybe an app where there is information about cars. So, it was more journey based. Fortunately, now what has happened is it has slowly moved to audience based buying. So, what audience based buying effectively is very simple, right? I, as Sudarshan, not at the individual level, it GDPR compliant and everything, every platform worth its salt is now. The idea is, can I actually get that data which will help me tailor your experience across multiple platforms, irrespective of what kind of media you're consuming? So that makes it more relevant. If I have clicked on a particular dealer ad, for example, in Bangalore in Electronic City, can I see something as micro as that? Right? And it's, as you know, as we mentioned in another video as well, more and more dealers are also jumping onto the bandwagon to make sure they are visible on digital. Right? So it has moved completely from placement based buying, saying I need to see my ad here, to buying the audience. So I think a welcome evolution. It's taken over a decade. But if you actually look at it, placement buying was nothing but stretch of how offline was built. You look at a newspaper, you say, I want to see my ad. Right? That's exactly how people search on Google, and you will see your ad here. So it's definitely moved. And now with a lot of AI also coming in, you just mentioned this on the IBM piece, with a lot of AI also coming in to the ad stats. it will effectively become even more seamless, even more relevant. So no more, hopefully, fewer annoying ads and more relevant ads that I will act upon, thereby benefiting platforms and brands.
We absolutely enjoyed the entire gamut of topics that we discussed, right from auto to marketing to sales leadership. So thanks once again, and absolute pleasure hosting you on the show.
Thank you so much.